Good evening. You're listening live to the Extreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob. Alongside me tonight, I have RDV. And while backstage, RDV, we were talking about hair bands, and I feel that may bleed over here into our movie discussion. It's only because 1984 was such a fantastic year for films, despite all the coziness of the 1980s and the warm, gushy feelings people like to have or pretend they have, and all the wholesomeness that we talk about on our show here on the Extreme Movie Show. I can sit there and say, rewatching Romancing the Stone after 30 plus years has left a few quick thoughts in my mind. One, still a good movie. Two, I'm not offended as a guy to watch it. Three, it's the kind of movie you put on and you go, yeah, it feels like the 80s, has a lot of 80s things to it, and it's beautiful to watch. And then maybe the last thought, I'll just throw it out there for the newer people getting ready to come in, because this is kind of led us up to what we were discussing. This new movie that came out with Channing Tatum, who, fortunately or unfortunately, I guess depending on your point of view, is of course hotter than that woman's face. Um, Everyone says, "Oh, this is Romancing the Stone. It's a ripoff. It's not as good." Or it's, I don't care if it's not as good. It's fun. It reminds me of Romancing the Stone. And I have to sit there and say, talking about this 1984 film, it's got Michael Douglas and va va voom. It's got Kathleen Turner in it. Wow, they have great chemistry. It's kind of simple. It's super simple, really, but it works on a lot of different levels that a lot of films today you can't, you have a tough time combining action and comedy and romance and chemistry and working. And I thought to myself, for a rather okay movie, pedestrian maybe by today's standards, Romancing the Stone '84 was a massive hit, spawning a questionable sequel the year later.
Hmm.
But people liked this film, had fun with it, and enjoyed it. And I think that when people talk about Lost City or whatever the movie out today is they want the same kind of thing. And I go, why is it so hard today to do something like it and give audience people what they want? And I'm confounded by it, and that's why we're here to discuss it here on the Extreme Movie Show. What's your initial take on Romancing the Stone?
Romance. So when I watched this for the first time when I was younger, I was probably in my teens, and I was like, oh, it's like a action movie slash comedy slash a little bit of romance, and I can understand why some guys are like, oh, it's a chick flick. And to me, it's like I have no problem with. There's chick flicks, and then there's really deep chick flicks. This is something you can still watch for as a guy. Even though it's catered towards a woman, romance kind of thing. There's
Hmm.
still action. There's still comedy. Danny DeVito brings the comedy in this, and just them two, Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner squabbling. He's trying to he's a treasure hunter and a con artist. Then she's just this person who's a yuppie. She's a New York yuppie. You know, she's there just basically she was being blackmailed because her sister was kidnapped and she's supposed to bring the stuff. And so it's like he just wants to live, and so she's being an idiot throughout the whole thing because she's naive gets him into trouble. And the fact that it takes place in the jungle too, where there's actual real threats in the jungle. So, it could be animals or just waterfalls, crocodiles, whatever. It adds a more interesting element, and it's been just like it takes place in the city. I like
Hmm.
the fact it's like they gotta either go on a boat or go on a seaplane or whatever. It's like something that in a kind of sense. This was actually it's an interesting movie, and as we were talking a little bit about this behind stage, the person who wrote this, Diane Thomas, actually the story was actually supposed to be like Indiana Jones 3, kind of. She was writing this and writing this story in mind for being the Indiana Jones movie. That's why it's kind of similar to in that sense. It kind of reminds you of the first, well, not really the first movie, but more like the second movie. You know, uh, where the girl is obnoxious and he's just like, just shut up.
Well, Robert Zemeckis produced this, and it was because this movie was such a massive success that it spawned I think one of the best movies of the '80s, one of my favorites anyway, and that's Back to the Future that would come out next year. And
Yep.
also, too, he collaborated with somebody, and if you listen to this and then go listen to Back to the Future, you go, yeah, sounds very similar. There's Alan Silvestri, who's done a lot of things too. So it definitely has that Silvestri Zemeckis feel to it, and that's not a bad thing at all. It actually adds to it a lot. If it wasn't, it didn't have that lush orchestral score to it and all that, and the playfulness with it, it wouldn't have worked. And to me, from the female perspective, you have a woman who's a romance writer, and the opening draw you in, kind of seen as kind of sexy in a tame civil way. But Baba Boom, the lady in the scene there, with the dagger and all that, that's kind of cool. It's a very chick thing, but it works because you, as a guy, you're watching this from the guy's perspective, not paying attention to women's. If you're a woman, you're looking at,
Hmm.
yeah, this is just a thing for her to meet, somebody who's different and, just want to go out and see the world and be swept off her feet kind of stuff, which literally happens. So, but having to go back to Kathleen Turner, her chemistry with Michael Douglas is perfect because once she realized that she's in way too deep, literally, things start to work out and they're bickering a lot too because when you like each other, you fight, you argue.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what the 80s has taught us
it's
about
the little bit.
relationships.
Yeah, it's the little things and over
Yeah,
stupid things.
but I thought the telling scene early on was when she gets the package mailed to her and we see the hitman coming and taking people out trying to track her down because the what she's been mailed to her is, of course, the treasure map where X marks the spot. And even though it's ridiculous and she's in New York City, she's at a martini bar with her publisher, who of course is a woman and her boss, and she's like, I just want you to get out and meet men. And it was a funny scene to me as a guy, and I think maybe women probably don't think it's funny, I don't know, but they go through like these shots of all these guys at the bar where she's like, oh, this one's boring loser, full of himself, too happy, too sad, serial killer, dope, oh, I dated him, I'm sorry. I thought it was kind of funny because you rarely get to see women kind of critique men in the way that women would do in that sort of setting. So again, initially you think this is from the woman's perspective because kind of really is the woman's world, and then the man just happens to show up in it and does everything for her that she wants it to be, and of course what she writes about. So again, it's hard, I think, sometimes to go full on rom-com, but it is, and it's successful. And I really hate saying that as a male because I don't want to see romance films unless it's from the male perspective, but this one has enough for both. You went out in the 80s and you saw this, and you could bring your girlfriend, your wife, your boyfriend, whatever, and both could leave, and you wouldn't have that weird, creepy kind of, And Danny DeVito's in
Mhm.
it for
Yep.
the stupid, dumb, lovable. I don't know what you want to call that character in
He's
here.
the annoying smuggler who basically thinks he's
You had this in the 80s. Yeah, it's horrible. I
yeah,
don't know.
he thinks he's smarter than everybody else, and then Gillis gets outsmarted by Jack, aka Michael Douglas's character. Because they're both more smugglers. Jack, Douglas's character is supposed to he basically he smuggles birds in for a living. In Colombia, and so base and then you have uh Danny DeVito's character. He's an antique smuggler who just he just wants they're all after basically the this giant emerald.
Mhm.
And that and it's like see, even Jack's after it for a little bit too because he wants money. And I think it's kind of funny back then because this movie also brings into the fact traveler checks. At first I've seen this mentioned in the movie, but it's because Joan has no money, but she'll pay you $375 in traveler checks. I'm thinking like, no, just give me the cash if you have cash. And I love this movie because anything that will go wrong does go wrong. But then like it once they start, just by sheer accident, they always survive, the good guys.
Well, and the thing too is we know what this movie is, and they don't try to go real serious in the last act
No.
or any of that kind of stuff. And it's the classic, romance, girls dreaming and pining about a guy who's different because, hey, being different as a male works. You don't want to be same cardboard cutout. And of course, that's what Michael Douglas is. And Michael Douglas stock was so hot in the 80s. I mean, he would go on to do Wall Street falling down. He's had a very long, successful career. And while not the biggest guy, or actor on the planet, physically speaking, he's always had a pretty solid presence. We've talked about before Streets of San Francisco and other things he's been in. And so, as a lifer in the acting world, he just has it. I mean, he just does. And one of the comments that Michelle has here in chat I wanted to touch on because I think it's very adequate. I think it's really explains Kathleen Turner, and I think it's something that's missing today is that where she says, I can't think of a Kathleen Turner movie where she didn't have chemistry with the leading male. She'd come off of a movie called Body Heat. Oh my goodness. Erotic thriller kind of stuff right
Yep.
up my alley. We had those in the 80s. You don't have those today. She just always had that. And she had that combination with her voice of being kind of sultry. But in this movie, she had they tried to make her look plain Jane, and it kind
Hmm.
of worked as a writer, like it was believable. But
Yeah.
then there was a lot of shots of her inadvertently being sexy, and so you saw scenes where Michael Douglas, even though his eyes on the valuable prize here, the jewel of the Nile, he starts noticing the more they're involved with each other. Hey, she is kind of cool. She is a nice, woman and all that too. And of course, things happen. But the only negative comment I heard about this film when I was looking at Twitter, people that would be on the feed for this as I was creating that invitation, one person said, and it was a gentleman who said, "Wow, really uncomfortable watching *Romancing the Stone* and all the eye gazing from Michael Douglas, toxic masculinity." And I'm like, and we usually don't go that far when it comes to what we discuss on films or the politics of things, because we're just talking about movies through a lens here. But I just thought, no, this is very wholesome. This is not lewd. It's not disgusting. It's not, R-rated hardcore kind of stuff. It's nothing by today's standards. It's extremely tame that a 10 or 12-year-old could watch it, and I don't think you'd feel too bad about it. It keeps the romantic element in there while having the adult thing on it of them kissing and all that too. It's not trash. And I just thought I was a little shocked to see that, because it's so whimsical. It's just that kind of a film, and I think anybody that sees something else more than that, I just go,
Well,
how?
the funny thing in here too is I love Jack's character because he necessarily wants to, he can't stand her, but there's a scene where they're making love, and he's like, "Oh, okay, I'll use this right," and then he grabs a map and puts it into his bag because he's just gonna split without her. I, uh, and I guess that's what they consider toxic. He was just using her sleeper so he can get to the map. That's probably what they're thinking. It's like, well, no, it's just that's what people did back before this is a movie. It's all about going after the treasure map.
Yep.
Is he a good honest person? Well, he's obviously a smuggler, so I wouldn't expect him to be a good person. In the sense where most people think like, oh yeah, he's a very good guy. He doesn't do this and no, he's
She
kind of a
wins him
he's
over
kind of a
with her
scoundrel.
wholesomeness.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
she
she knows
tamed
this.
the feral beast.
Yeah, he's a scoundrel, and she gets with them knowing this. Uh, Danny DeVito's character, yes, is played up for laughs. He's in the white suit and the hat and all that stuff.
Right, right.
Uh, you got
Creeping around corners.
you got. I think it's is that Manuel Odeja Canalzolo that's in the Hawaiian shirt with the gun? Yeah, in the Jerry curls. Yeah, it's like I said, this movie is played up for laughs, and I just love everything about it. I mean, it's one of those movies where you look at it, it's like, okay, and this is because when I first saw this, I was like, I wrote it off. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be like a dumb movie. But then I actually sat and watched it. I was like, this movie's crazy. It's all up there,
It is.
and there's a crocodile pit. I know, and I love even towards the end of the movie, like the crocodile thing comes back to as a joke. He's got crocodile boots on. He's like, oh, it's like, yeah, an unfortunate accident with a crocodile. He and he ingested a ruby or the gem,
Yeah, yeah.
so he made boots out of them.
That was definitely, I think, one of the most male scenes is when at the end where she's getting ready to get killed, and she's trying to fend off the attacker there, and he's one level below her, and he's trying to hold on to the to the gator's tail because he had swallowed the jewel, and he's looking at her. He's like, "God damn it!" And he has to let it go to go save her. That's such a guy thing to do, and it was such a guy thing and romantic thing that happens right afterwards is when they reconcile there, and he's basically says he's going to leave her, and you could tell that's the point where he's falling for it because he gives her a big kiss and does a very guy thing. He just jumps off, dives into the water. And we know as a guy, yeah, he's going after the treasure and he's going to come get you, where she's kind of like pining maybe a little bit about the one that got away, or she was still kind of glowing about stuff until he shows up at her apartment at the end there with the boat there in Midtown Manhattan or whatever, or Upper East Side or wherever it was at. And that's where I see this movie really fits so well for a man or a woman, a young or old, because it has elements of both. It's not a creepy film. DeVito's presence is a scoundrel. You're right. It's played a little bit for laughs and yucks. But there's a lot of stuff going on here. It's a stranger in a strange land. It just happens to be a woman. The woman's being the adventurer. Everybody was crazy for Indiana Jones and things at this time too. So to see something like the Goonies or any of these kind of chase sort of movies where you're going after something, who doesn't love maps, buried treasures, and within 15 minutes you go from wherever you're at to somewhere you've never been before. I mean, that's everybody, right? I mean, that's the beauty of a summer type film like this. It takes you out of your comfort zone, places you somewhere where you're again an alien and you have to figure out, hey, we're not in Kansas anymore. What are we going to do about it? And that's the beauty of it is you could argue that they gender swapped, the character with her and somebody else in a way too. And obviously, they seem to be a happy couple at the end too. So everybody wins.
Yeah, and like I say, the jokes in this are just hilarious. The situational stuff, like the expressions on Kirk. I always want to call him Kirk Douglas because he looks so much like his dad.
He
Michael
does. He
Douglas's
does.
face, his when he's agitated and he just like he's ready just to go crazy because she won't shut up or she won't leave him alone. And he has to do stuff. He's also got his the little vest on, the leather vest on. Looks so ridiculous, but it's totally 80s. There's a scene with the alligator towards the end, and where she's being held, hostage, and then bad guy's got the jewel in his hand, and he's got a knife next to her. He cuts her hand. They're like, we're gonna feed you to the gator, and he's looking at Jack, and then he just look. You see the bad guy's just kind of sweating his face. He's like, he's all desperate, I'll kill her, and then here comes alligator and just bites his hand, takes the jewel. It's like, and he's just seeing him like, and you see the fake blood and stuff. It's like, but then of course, this is where they give Jack. He just goes Bruce Willis and just fires the machine gun at him wildly. It's like, I'm gonna kill her. it's like I said, this is the acting, the wardrobes, because there's Danny DeVito, his nice costume gets torn to pieces, shredded, and he's got a black eye in the movie. This is could be normally, let's say that if you listen to the plot, if you just read the script, it doesn't sound as great until you actually watch the movie and you realize, oh my gosh,
yeah,
it's like they took something that was so generic and turned it into a masterpiece. And I think that's why this movie, with only a budget of 10 million, walked out with $115 million at the end.
Monster hit. I'm telling you, 84 was a very fun year for movies, and I want to tie a few things into the cultural part of it. As you're half a generation younger than I am, and I was an 80s kid, those are the kind of things we like to bring up and compare and contrast here on the Extreme Movie Show. Even though we're 80s based, we do branch out and do lots of different things, occasionally some TV as well. But I remember in 1982 or 3, I think it was 83, I believe. Eddie Grant had the song called Electric Avenue, and it was the first time I heard just kind of this island sound kind of, and I don't mean the Police reggae ska kind of stuff with the guitars because I was a big Police fan, but Eddie Grant did the soundtrack to Romancing the Stone. I think Billy Ocean's the one that did the stuff in the sequel, which is in 85, because in 84 to 85, Billy Ocean blew up and was huge. And he's the one that goes on tours. And backstage, you and I are talking about how you saw Trickster, of all bands, for you 80s people out there, the other night playing in the great Midwest where you're from. And it's just amazing to me because, again, you might know where a song's going, you might know where it leads to. And I'm thinking of like 80s music blues or whatever like that. And it doesn't matter. Eddie Grant's Electric Avenue, pretty much there's not a lot of lyrics to it. And it's over and over and over again. You could say that about Sweet Dreams with the Eurythmics from 1983, a big, massive #1 hit too. But the point you said about the movie, it is so true. You take something that's a generic formula, but the way you execute it and the people you throw into it matters. And by this point in the 80s, people were going out to have fun in films. I always kind of like take a dump on E.T. a little bit because it's such a smarmy, cute kids film, even though it's done well. I don't hate it, but I like stuff like The Thing and John Carpenter films and, just different stuff a little bit. But you had so many different films that you could go see. Your favorite film, Ghostbusters, 1984, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, what a year to be alive just to be a teenager
for comedy,
and to go out and to
because it
see
has
films.
comedy, science fiction, action,
Fantasy.
Yeah, fantasy, all that stuff.
Yeah,
and,
I
like,
mean, it's absolutely
people talk
tremendous
about
thing.
Lord of the Rings. I'm like, it has nothing in Ghostbusters. Sorry. Lord of the Rings is just 3 hours, just like, no thanks. I can watch Ghostbusters 3 times in that one time.
Well, the thing to it is that when we talk about Kathleen Turner, we haven't talked about her much lately. We haven't talked about her a lot at all, but she does have great chemistry with Michael Douglas, and it's not just because of Michael Douglas being great. We've talked about Michael Douglas in our review of Falling Down, but for her, I mean, at some point we'll probably end up reviewing Body Heat and everything too. But she was like several other women, a strong presence in the 80s. She just wasn't there as a dumb bimbo side piece sort of thing that you might see in some films and all that too. She was literally, you could argue, the star of the show.
Yeah, and if you've noticed, those who watch the second one, why it's not as good because it doesn't have Michael Zex in it. It doesn't have what's his name, Michael something. The director Robert Zemeckis isn't back in the sequel,
right?
Because Kathleen Turner bitched. She didn't like because her quote was, she said in the talking about the film's production, I remember terrible arguments with him doing romancing. He's a film school grad, fascinated by camera and effects. I never felt that he knew what I was having to do to adjust my acting to some of his damn cameras. Sometimes he puts you in ridiculous postures. I'd say, this is not helping me. This is not the way I like to work. Thank you. But he, they eventually did work together, but not on the sequel, Jewel of the Nile. He casted her as Jessica Rabbit in Who Frames Roger Rabbit, and that's about it. So well, she came kind of she should be thanking the fact that his camera and all that stuff and his work would have made the first movie such a success.
I wanted to answer Jim's comment because he's asking us a question about whatever happened to El Guapo. He said this in Three Amigos, the only movies you remember seeing him in. Well, Jim, El Guapo, you could argue that he died and he morphed into the Gator, which I think is an inside joke, unless somebody's a hardcore fan of the Far Cry series, because in Far Cry 6, one of the creatures you get, the first one, the alligator is named Guapo. And I'm like, younger people don't realize that all the references going back to 80s really show up a lot, and it's gone on a lot longer than it typically does. And I've just wondered if things are going to stall out and just be 80s and maybe a little bit 90s, because one of the themes we've come up here when we've talked about things, whether it's all the canon classics that are out there from 70s and 80s and the 90s, of just how some of the topics of movies have changed. And I'll start my closing thoughts with this about the movie. This is not a movie that I'm going to sit there and say, oh, got to watch me some Romancing the Stone. It's no Ace Ventura, right? But I tell you, it's a good movie. It's a fun movie. It's one that I sat down and today we watched it and went, okay, it's still pretty good. It's not dated or anything. And there's a lot of sexy sax in it, which is a big thing in the 80s. So we've talked about that. I like it. I think it's a good representation of what films can be, what they should be. And there's nothing wrong with making a very syrupy corn pop kind of movie like this that you just go, yeah, it is what it is. It's not a big deal. Let's go see it. And I think today things are thrown together that everything has to be the most serious in the world, or it has to have these biggest stakes. It's like, shut up. Let us watch the friggin' characters do what they do, and we'll decide what we like and don't like. I hate being told what to pay attention to and what the message means in movies these days. And despite that, again, you can't go wrong with a movie like this. I think it's tremendous, Then again, we recently covered Toxic Avenger, so I guess it depends on where your tastes lie, but both of them are really good films. What final thoughts do you have about Romancing the Stone?
That this is one of those movies you can just watch with your kids, actually. Well, if you skip out the sex scene, that's about it. But other than this,
making love scene, sir, there's a difference. I'm just telling you, there is. You're making sweet love.
You make it sweet whoopee. That's what you're making.
That's exactly what it is. Sex is just the act of making love.
Like I said, no, this is a movie. You said this is right up there with Indiana Jones. If you watch those kind of movies, this is a movie you kind of want to watch together for two opposites attracts movie. That's what you want to watch. And then, unfortunately, this movie inspired Harrison Ford to do a movie with David Schwimmer and Anne Heche called 7 Days and 7 Nights. Don't watch that.
I don't want to talk about that. We don't plan to talk about that.
No. Like I said, it's a fun movie. It's 80s. It's adventure. Watch this and go play Pitfall.
You know what? I'll ask you this question, and I'll ask the audience too as well. I have not seen, was it Lost City, the movie that just came out?
Oh, no, I haven't seen it either.
So I don't know if people love it, if they hate it. I just mentioned that it seems like a lot of the online press is that it reminds them of this movie. So if anybody's seen it in there and thinks it's good or bad, or my immediate question would be is how does it compare to this? Because
it's got
if we end up doing a review it, I know that's going to happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's a loosely ripoff. Like there's I think Brad Pitt's in it too. I'm not sure.
I believe he is.
I think
he's getting the long lingering looks.
I think he's supposed to be, his character is supposed to be like a ripoff of Jack. and obviously Sandra Bullock is supposed to be Joan, and then Channing Tatum is just a guy who just wants to prove that he can be the good guy. He plays a wimp in this movie.
I, I don't
But
want to sound really horrible saying this, but it's a shame when Channing Tatum is just much more hotter or beautiful, depending on how you want to describe it, than Sandra Bullock's face or whatever remains of it. And I
Sandra
don't
Bullock's
dislike
going for
Sandra
a lot.
Bullock.
Have you noticed that a lot of her movies like this, when she stars out opposite of guys, they're usually younger than her.
Yes, yes.
The last one was with I think it was a proposal with Ryan Reynolds.
She's been around, and she was always, a cute, charming kind of thing. She's not the sex spot Kathleen Turner is. It's just a
No,
different type of vibe. But I think them or whoever put this movie together think of Romancing the Stone. I mean, it's nice that this is kind of the template. I mean, we've talked about strong women before too, Lauren Bacall, Humphrey Bogart, and some of those films we've covered too. So there's definitely a long lead of them, and I like to see them too without them being angry or pissy or whatever. And Kathleen Turner did a great job in here. I really
yeah.
thought she nailed it.
There is one thing for my final thoughts about this movie. I learned that Pixel can't watch it. It's just too adult for him.
Well, alrighty then.
Hear that,
You know,
Pixel? You couldn't watch it. Couldn't review with us. It's too grown up for you.
well, things happen here on the Extreme Movie Show
Darn
with the
Zoomer.
schedules between the three of us too. So, just as a quick aside, let everybody know, Tuesday nights, where RDV and I usually cover something 80s based. Not always. We'll do sci-fi. We'll do some older films, classic, but we do like our canon films, 80s actions. We just love that stuff. Sunday night is a special night because it's Father's Day. Typically, we review Commando because it's the best father's movies of all time, and when you tune in, you'll hear why. But before that, usually around 6 o'clock Eastern, we cover whatever particular show that we're covering at the time. Right now, it's The Prisoner, the one with Patrick McGowan. We just finished episode 7, Many Happy Returns. However, instead of doing Prisoner next week, we should be doing the next James Bond movie because Pixel and I, the young 20-something guy here from Central Florida, I was going to be recovering it, and we'll be doing The Man with the Golden Gun, which, hey, Bond on Father's Day, that's a score. So we're all invited to check that out too. We love going through the Bond films. He's not seen all of them, so we're going in order from the very first one. You can check those out as well too. Any other last things you need to plug or get out there, RDV, before we call it a night?
Not I can think of, other than maybe we'll see some more Michael Douglas films.
I agree. And in the more words of Billy Ocean, get out of my dreams and get into my car, sir. On that, I like to say thanks everybody for listening, Miss O, and everybody who showed up here tonight too. Again, letting people know about us too, and all that's just the best thing too as we grow here on the Extreme Movie Show. We really love doing it. We love having a lot of fun and just talking something simple. So if you have a particular request you'd like us to take a look at and cover, by all means, send us a message. We'd be happy to take a look at it. For RDV, for Professor Pixel, who again is not here tonight, but will be next week, I'd like to say thanks for everybody for listening. Thanks for watching, showing up. And as always, stay extreme.
Later.